Welcome to the Mean Lady Talking Podcast. This is the podcast that tackles tough questions about relationships, life, love, and loss. It may not be the advice you want, but it's probably the advice you need. And now here's your host, grief therapist, motivational speaker, relationship expert, best-selling author, and attorney, the not really mean lady herself, Susan J. Elliott.
Susan Elliott, host of Mean Lady Talking Podcast. And welcome back to episode 59. Now, episode 59 is going to be a special episode because it's going to be 3 parts. I'm hoping to get them out one right after the other. I'm not going to release them until all of them are recorded, but it is going to be on attachment, rejection, grief, and loss. And many of you have told me that there's plenty of information on the internet about attachment styles and attachment issues, but there's not a lot about how to deal with them, how to heal them. That was my intention of my 3rd book. I actually wanted the book to be a 2nd book, but as many of you know, my publisher insisted on getting back out there. And then when I proposed this book, they made an offer on it. And the book is going to be called When the Person You Love Doesn't Love You, How to Reject the Rejector, Heal Your Attachment Issues, and Find Your Way to Real Love. That's the name of the book. Now, they held publishing this book out as a carrot for me to write the 2nd book. As many of you know, and I don't want to go into this big soliloquy about this, but as many of you know, they screwed up the marketing of the 2nd book. They even screwed up the editing. I mean, there's typos in the book, and I'm very, very upset about that. I'm kind of anal retentive about typos, and it really upset me because I edited it a few times and kept sending it back, and yet it went to print with typos still in it. Anyway, so they botched the marketing of getting back out there. They marketed it as a dating book. They didn't do a great job of getting publicity for the book, and I was really angry. But they had the right of first refusal on my next book. We had a deal about the next book, and I gave them a book proposal, and they made an offer, but it was the offer that they gave me was an insult. And they based their offer on the lower sales and lack of reviews for Getting Back Out There. Now, when I asked you guys to please buy and review Getting Back Out There, it's not just because of this reason, but this was a big reason, and it also is a big reason because you're only as good as your last book. So they made an offer. I pulled the book. I didn't want them to do it. I thought their offer was insulting. And also the way that they had mucked up Getting Back Out There, I didn't really trust them with this book. This book is very important to me, and I think it's important to a lot of people. And like you guys have said, there's not a lot on the internet of how to heal attachment issues, and this book tells you how. And I'm going to start the crowdfunding for it in a little while. And I have been looking at a lot of self-published books. They're absolutely horrible. I don't know if everybody in the world thinks that they're an author now, but having gone through the post-production process with a major publisher, I know that if you don't have a great editor, if you don't have a great book designer, if you don't have a lot of input, your book is going nowhere. I had my own editor before I sent it to my publisher, then their editors, and even though on the 2nd book they screwed it up, the 1st book they did a pretty good job. But both the private editor that I hired and my publisher's editor had found things that I was unaware of. It's really hard to look at your own writing and step away from it, especially when you're kind of in love with your own writing. You know, you put things down on paper and you want to sell it as a book because you think that this is good enough to be shared with everybody. But even the best writers have good editors, and I've just seen so much slop on Amazon, and I have the Kindle-free lending library, and I borrow a lot of these self-published books in the self-help genre, and they're garbage. I mean, they're absolutely garbage. And there's all these internet gurus who are telling you, oh, you could do an ebook in 10 minutes. Yeah, you could do a crappy ebook in 10 minutes. You can't do a quality ebook in 10 minutes. And half of the people that are telling you that haven't even done any ebooks. It's all about cut corners, rush it to market, make money. That's not what I want to do with this. What I want to do with this is raise enough money to put a quality book out there for everybody to have and enjoy. That's what I want. If you want to be a part of this, if you think that this book is important enough, I will continue to let my podcast people know where the book is at whatever stage. And when I kick off the crowdfunding, I'll let you guys know. And the podcast has its own website now, meanladytalking.com. Please go there. Please sign up for the Patreon account. Please support the podcast. Starting with this series, I am releasing bonus episodes. There will be a bonus episode to this series. Even though it's a 3-part series, there's going to be bonus material that is only for the patrons, $4.99 and above. And then there will be, for a certain tier, there will be weekly mini episodes. So if you are a patron, $4.99 and above, you are going to get an extra episode for the Attachment, Rejection, and Loss series. So I invite everybody to go to the meanladytalking.com website and please click on Become a Meanie and support the podcast, because I'm going to be giving updates on the book and other things through the podcast. So I hope that you guys come along and help support the podcast. Okay, so here we go. In 93, 94, I'd experienced a group of losses, and I'd been in therapy. I'd been doing really well, and my life was really calm and nice. And then all of a sudden, I was rocked with all these losses. So a friend of mine who listens to the podcast and has been a friend of mine for many years. Hi, Barb. Barb, if you're out there, hello. I know you're going through some stuff right now, and I hope that everything's okay with you, and please feel free to keep writing to me. So anyway, Barb goes to hear John James speak. John James is the Grief Recovery Institute, who I've never heard of. And she comes back with the book, The Grief Recovery Handbook. And she gave it to me because she knew that I was experiencing losses at the time. And I gave it to another friend of mine, and then we all went on a grief retreat. And one of the things that I've tried to impress upon you guys is go where recovery happens. I have workshops, I have seminars, I have boot camps, but there's a whole world out there. And I always put my recovery first. I had 3 kids. I was a single mom. I got squat for child support, but I took money every single week and put it aside for conferences, workshops, paid support groups, paid therapy groups, all kinds of things that I wanted to do to add to my recovery. And as you know, I've recovered fairly substantially and fairly well. And at this time, there was no Google. You couldn't go find conferences and workshops. You had to kind of go to this place. It might have a flyer, and that place might have a flyer. I used to buy self-help books at a 12-step bookstore called the Sober Camel in Providence, Rhode Island, because they didn't even have a self-help section in a regular bookstore. There was a core group of us that was dealing with grief issues, and we went on a grief retreat. And at the grief retreat, another friend of ours was there, and we gave her the book. So Barb and this other woman and the other woman that we gave the book to at the grief retreat and we started a grief group, and we used the Grief Recovery Handbook to do that. And I was so taken with the effect that had on me that I started chasing grief recovery. I got a grief therapist. It was a man. I had a woman therapist for the first few years of my recovery, and I got a man therapist, and I talk about him in episode 5, Shoulda, Woulda, Coulda, and it's another person that Barb knows. And he and I did amazing work together. And being a crazy researcher, if you've seen my videos, you know that I have like 1,000 hardcover books, and I even have paperbacks and stuff downstairs. But right now, I tend to only keep hardcover books on my bookshelves because that's all I have the room for. But I have a tendency, when I'm interested in a topic, I go crazy and order every book that's ever been written on the subject. So I did that with grief, and I ran across the work of John Bowlby. And many people know that a book that I absolutely love, and this all came about at the same time, is 7 Choices by Elizabeth Harper Neild. And in that book, she has an incredible bibliography, and a lot of her resources became my resources. And she also quotes Beverly Raphael, who I quote as the person who talks about the phases of grief rather than the stages of grief. So that book was very instrumental in pointing me in different places. Therese Rando, who wrote How to Go On After a Person Who Has Loved You Has Died, and I have studied all of her stuff, even her most academic stuff. And one after the other, led me to John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. And John Bowlby famously wrote a 3-part series. It's called the Attachment and Loss Trilogy, and it's very dense. It's very academic, and I plowed through it like I was just devouring it. And I was taking prerequisites to get into graduate school at the time. I had decided to become a therapist. I had a nice boyfriend who was helping me with the kids, supporting my plans to go to school. The losses and the grief that came up with them had threatened to derail that plan, and I was really upset. So I was plowing through things like a crazy person. And when I came across John Bowlby's Attachment and Loss Trilogy, I thought, this is the answer. This is absolutely the answer. And I continued to follow his work. I found other authors, Colin Murray Parkes, anybody who's read my stuff on no contact and the searching mechanism of grief knows that comes from Colin Murray Parkes. And I found Colin Murray Parkes through studying John Bowlby. So there's all these little connections all over the place. But John Bowlby studied children who were hospitalized, institutionalized after World War II, and he started to write on the subject of maternal deprivation. And he says that maternal deprivation can have a significant and irreversible mental health consequence. And his writing at the time was incredibly controversial. Nobody had really come up and talked about things like that, or that there was something that you could do for children who had lost their parents. His main focus of the maternal deprivation theory was that children's experiences of their early interpersonal relationships affect their adult relationships. And we all know that that's true. If you're listening to this podcast, if you have read my other work, if you've done the work in the workbook, in the books, you know that this is true. Your early relationships affect your adult life. But probably the most significant thing that happens is maternal deprivation. And that can happen when you're an infant, a toddler, a small child, a middle child, a teenager, whenever it happens. And in the new book, one of the people that I'm following through the book, someone who was a client of mine, she had a wonderful, caring, giving mother, and then her brother died. Her mother just checked out at that point. She just was completely unable to parent at that point. And it was during the 70s when a lot of women still stayed home, and her siblings were all older. They were out of the house. They thought that their mother was still being the nurturing, kind, loving mother that they grew up with, Mrs. Cleaver, with the cookies and all of that. But that's not what the youngest child experienced. The youngest child experienced a woman who laid on the couch day after day after day, basically lifelessly. And she didn't have any interaction until her father came home. And even though it happened later on in her childhood, she was like 7 or 8, it affected her profoundly. And since I started writing this book, I've run some boot camps where I've had other people who have had a parent who either got lost to grief or alcohol or drugs or something, where they have the memory of the good mother and then the mother that got affected by whatever happened. And that mother really affected how they see the world and also their ability to trust anybody. If you've had a mother who has either kind of kept you guessing, which is what my mother did. She kept me 8 years in foster care. I never knew whether I was coming or going. And you lose your ability to trust somebody. So if you've had a case where a mother has kind of run hot and cold, or a mother was a really great mother, then some intervening thing happened and now she's a horrible mother, you lose your ability to trust people. And if you do get to trust somebody and then that person rejects you, it's devastating, and it's harder to rebound from that than if you didn't have a mother who had once been a great mom and then was a terrible mom. So if you've had the maternal deprivation that John Bowlby writes about, you develop attachment issues. Like Colin Murray Parkes, John Bowlby was interested in the work of Konrad Lorenz, which is the person that I write about with the gray lag goose. And John Bowlby studied Lorenz, who studied goslings, showing that they imprint on the first objects that they see, the mother basically. And in turn, John Bowlby influenced Robert Hinde, Hinde, who studied the effects of attachment in primates, first monkeys and then humans. And Bowlby influenced Hinde to start his groundbreaking work on attachment theory. There was all of this work being done by all of these people on exactly how people attach and how that attachment affects adult relationships. So Bowlby published his trilogy in 1969, 1972, and 1980. So there was a good decade between Volume 1 and Volume 3. But he explored all of the things that I've just talked about, and it was all about a child's tie to the early caregivers. It was all about what happens when a child's ties are broken. John Bowlby said that all people have an internal view of themselves and an internal view of others. And the view of yourself and the view of others come primarily from your relationship with your primary caregiver. And that sets up how you see the world and how you come to expect others to treat you or not treat you. How much you can trust them, how much you can't trust them, how much confidence you can have in yourself, how much confidence you can have in others, and how dependent you will be on yourself and how dependent you will be on others. If you're rejected at an early age, you come to see yourself as rejected goods. And this is where Getting Past Your Breakup and the new book kind of part ways. Because Getting Past Your Breakup is for anybody experiencing a breakup. And what happened was, after Getting Past Your Breakup came out, I was hearing from people who were having trouble getting past the rejection aspect of the breakup. Now, as I've said many, many, many times, Getting Past Your Breakup is a universal breakup book for absolutely everybody. I wrote it to be gender neutral, sexual orientation neutral, length of relationship neutral. It's really for anybody, even the person who did the breaking up, because many times people break up a relationship because it's not working for them. They're not being treated the way they need to be treated or they want to be treated. So even if you're the person who did the breaking up, you still have a grief process to go through. And GPYB teaches that there is a universal core of feeling that almost everyone experiences if you let it. Again, if you know my work on grief, and please go to the Grief Podcast, which explains all of that more in depth than I'm going to here. But none of us are taught how to process the grief. So many people will go into another relationship, will turn to drugs, alcohol, will overeat, will oversleep, will fall into depression, a whole bunch of things that people do in order to circumvent their grief process. And I've been talking on this for years, and I talk about it in the grief series here on this podcast. But if you learn about grief, if you learn about the fact that you have to feel all your feelings and you have to heal them in order to go on, it makes it a little more tolerable. You know, this is normal, that's normal. We talk about this in the Facebook group all the time. Is this normal? Yes, it's normal. Review and relinquishment. Oh my God, I thought I was over my ex. I woke up in the morning and I dreamt about my ex all night, and it's really disturbing and it's really upsetting. That's part of review and relinquishment. It's part of the thing that the mind goes through in order for you to ultimately let go. Getting Past Your Breakup basically teaches that you need to go through the grief process in order to heal. And that's why I say if your ex has toddled off with a new love and completely decided to not pay any attention to the grief process, that's not a healthy response to grief. If you're staying home, crying, walking the floors, being upset, that's the healthy response to grief. You have to let those emotions out. So even if it feels unfair, oh, my ex went on to be in this relationship and is all happy and loving and doesn't pay attention to our breakup, that's not the healthy thing to do. So don't worry about it. Don't be envious of it. It's not the thing to be doing. But even with all of the work of getting past your breakup, there are still people who struggle with the rejection, struggle with the fact that somebody rejected them. And this is typically the people that have attachment issues. Now, I've written about half of the book, and I'm going to be finishing it up over the summer. So the new boot camp that starts on June 21st, I'm going to be addressing attachment issues. And if you want a basic boot camp, if you're not there for the attachment issues, that's fine. Join the boot camp because the next one is not going to be until November. So I'm doing this one a little differently. There'll still be a 1.5 hour to 2 hour call each week for the whole group. But then I'm going to have another call and different exercises for people who want to work on attachment issues. So if you've done a boot camp with me before, you're welcome to come to this one, either to just do the basic boot camp or do the basic boot camp plus the attachment issues. They always ask me if the work that they do with me is going to wind up in a book. And the answer is no, I'm not going to say, oh, I had this person who said this or this person who said that. But I have the same things happen over and over again. And the people that I'm writing about in the new book are clients of mine. I have plenty of examples from over the years. And if you do work with me over the summer and I say to you, is it okay if I mention, not you by name, but mention your situation in the book? I'm not going to put it in the book unless I ask you first. But no, this is not so that you could be my guinea pig. I have many years of experience with attachment issues and dealing with clients and boot campers and all kinds of people. So it's not that I need the group of this summer, but if I'm going to be really digging into finishing this book, I thought that I would take that experience and be able to roll it into the boot camp so that people could come and really get a good sense of how to heal their attachment issues with me in the boot camp. So if you want to join the boot camp on June 21st, if you've already asked me for a registration form and you haven't gotten it, please ask me again. And there is a discount for GPYB alum. So please sign up for that and send me email. And I'm trying to send all the registration forms out at once because I don't want to oversell this. It's very important that only 6 to 8 people be in this boot camp. So if you want to be in this boot camp, please get to me immediately. So despite all of the work that people do with GPYB, the workbook, and in boot camp, I still heard from people who were still grappling with the idea of being rejected. And typically these are people who have deep attachment issues. And I identify a lot with these people. As many of you know, even though I was the person who ended my marriage, my ex was abusive and unfaithful, within a few weeks I begged him to come back because my resolve had crumbled under the weight of all my unresolved losses. Being by myself for the first time in my life was just too much for me. But with the help of a remarkable therapist, I uncovered my rejection and attachment issues because, like many other people, I saw myself simply as quote unquote rejectable. That means you feel inherently unlovable and lucky to have someone, anyone, even an unfaithful, unloving, abusive banana head in your life because your self-esteem is so low and because you feel like rejected goods. You feel like you're just lucky to have anyone that you happen to have. Early in my recovery, I went to a women's therapy group. It was a paid therapy group in addition to all the other things that I was doing. And one night we had a guest speaker. And this woman, she was beautiful. She was vibrant. She was beaming. She just seemed to glow. And I assumed that she was a trained professional who had kind of come here to lecture to us and that she hadn't experienced any of the pain, the heartache, and all the rejection that the rest of us had experienced. But then she started talking to us about her story. And she came from a military family. Not only were both of her parents in the armed forces, but every sibling had enlisted straight from high school. And she was the youngest. But unlike her siblings, she had gotten into a fair share of trouble growing up. And her father constantly derided her for her ability to quote-unquote follow the rules. A military family is not the place where you want to be the rebel. So she was determined to take her place among the soldiers and sailors in her family. She scored high marks on her enlistment exam, but during the physical process, the military discovered a previously undiagnosed medical condition, and they labeled her a rejectee. Rejectee. And when she said the word rejectee, a chill went up my spine. Rejectee. I thought, oh my God, that's me. I'm a rejectee. So after she had this life-changing event, her family shunned her. Even though a medical issue was way beyond her control, she had the previous acting out for her father and mother to point to and say, see, well, you were never really good in the first place. She felt shame, she felt defective, and she felt like an outsider in her own family. The one thing that every single person in her family was so proud of was their own military service and the military service of everybody in their family, and she could not give them that one thing. So she left home at the age of 18. She married her high school sweetheart, and she just tried to get away from her family, which is basically why she married him. And because they were two 18-year-olds without a clue, without a brain in their head, the marriage lasted 17 months. And when it ended, even though she didn't feel like she loved this guy, she knew when she married him that she was just doing it to get away from her family. Even though she had no love for this guy, the ending of the marriage shook her to her core. And from that point on, she went from one relationship to the next relationship to the next relationship to the next relationship. And every time it ended, whether she ended it or someone else ended it, the words came back to her. Rejectee. And she said that she became a serial monogamist. Those were her words for it. And she said, I had no idea what I was doing when I was in a relationship, but even less when I got out of a relationship. And so, based on her complete confusion, she got back into a relationship as quickly as she could. And as she was telling the story that night, everyone in the room was nodding in agreement. We all identified with what she was saying. At the age of 40, she had been married and divorced 3 times. When her last marriage ended, she sought counseling, and she discovered that she always believed that there was something wrong with her. That feeling was confirmed by her father first, telling her she didn't know how to follow the rules, and then by the Army, and then by every man she was ever in a relationship with. She became a self-fulfilling prophecy that nobody wants me, everyone leaves because I'm a rejectee. At my very core, I'm rejectable goods. But through her therapy, she learned that she had spent her whole life believing that something was terribly, terribly wrong with her, and she didn't fit anywhere. What she said that night stuck with me, stayed with me, and to this day I can quote it verbatim. She said, even though I believed that rejection was par for the course, every rejection brought about complete and utter devastation. And that's what I understood to be true. Because even though I would break up with somebody who was abusive and horrible and terrible to me, the breakup would bring about complete and utter devastation. So like me, she worked with a skilled therapist. Now, at the time that I met this woman, I had not been in therapy long, so I didn't know that my therapist was going to work wonders as she did. But like this woman, I found a very skilled therapist who understood that type of rejection, that understood those issues. But at the age of 40, she found health and happiness on her own, being by herself, rather than through seeking it through a relationship, because she knew, just as I knew, you're not going to find fulfillment through a relationship. But when that's all you've ever done, that's all you know how to do. And like my therapist, her therapist said she had to become comfortable with independence. And she had to build a life by herself. And part of that life had to be working on her self-esteem, which is why I push the affirmations as much as I do. It's a very important part of this. And there's different ones that you need to do if you have attachment issues. So after working through everything, she started dating men who, and her experience was like mine, although I hadn't experienced it yet, that all the men that she dated after she built her own life were very different. They were much better. And finally, she met a guy that she got into a relationship with and was very happy with. She had spent 3 years out of relationship at the age of 40, even though she wanted to have children. And even though in the 90s, there wasn't a lot of women having babies after 40. But she knew that she had to put having children on the back burner and figure herself out first. So she spent 3 years and did not get back into dating until she had built a life that she was not willing to give up for anyone or anything. I can't begin to tell you how that woman inspired me. I'm sure you know from my own story that I went on to emulate her in every way possible. I worked through my own issues and I became a therapist. And I wanted to be the therapist that helped other people work through their issues. And I realized that my own core clientele was comprised of what she had called rejectees. And when I started my own journey as a rejectee, I would never see another rejectee and think of anything about them except complete respect and empathy. Living life as a rejectee is so difficult. And I know that only too well. I know how it feels to exist in a world where you feel like you're on the outside looking in and you don't quite fit anywhere. I know what it's like to blindly chase the rejectors, wishing for another chance with someone who has already pronounced you unsuitable. I know what it's like to feel at the end of a relationship that your core secret to the world that you're unlovable and rejectable is being revealed. The end of every relationship shouts to the world, see, she's unlovable. See, she's rejectable. See, she's a rejectee. That's all she'll ever be. That portrait is so damning and so humiliating that you feel like you have to win the rejecter back no matter what. I know the pain that comes with the inner voice that every breakup brings out that says, see, no one wants you. And we all know that our inner voices say much harsher things. Rejection hurts. It's a terribly distressing feeling. And people who have a fear of abandonment and attachment issues, rejection is much more than if you leave me, I'll be really upset. When you have attachment issues and fear of abandonment, it's if you leave me, I will die. Rejection is the thing that makes you so unhinged that you start chasing someone who abused you, who cheated on you, who treated you like hell. But it doesn't have to be that way. I uncovered my childhood wounds of rejection and neglect. I confronted my attachment issues, and I went on to become a healthy person, attracted to healthy people, and I found the love of my life who adored me. I ultimately rejected the rejecter, and I spent the last 25 years working privately with rejectees to help them uncover their hidden scars, recognize and change their patterns, and come out on the other side. I know there's not a lot of stuff on the internet about how to deal with attachment issues. I know that. Everybody wants to talk about, oh, I'm anxiously attached, I'm anxious, I'm attachment avoidant, I'm this, I'm that. You can say those words, but that doesn't mean you know what the hell to do about it. I know what to do about it. I came out on the other side. I've helped people for 25 years come out on the other side. And so can you. The book that I'm writing and the work that I'm doing is the key to turning it around and to never again feeling like you have to run after an unworthy partner. So in the next 2 episodes, I'm going to tell you exactly how recovery happens. And you're not going to be able to heal all your attachment issues from a 3-series podcast. But I want to let you know that I know how to pick yourself up and dust yourself off after a terrible rejection. The new book is going to deal with your issues, your ex's issues, how to change your patterns, and how to plan for a healthier and brighter future. You'll learn how to be single and how to celebrate that status as the mark of an independent, well-rounded person rather than a label to be ashamed of. You'll learn how to develop a healthy, positive self-image and to insist on only loving behavior from others. And you will only allow the people in your life who will see you in the same affirming light. One of my goals in the book in the boot camp and whatever goes beyond the book, because I plan on doing more work beyond the book. And if I can crowdfund to a certain level, I want to go out and speak on these topics and help as many people as I can. I want to help people climb out of rejection, despair, and into a new frame of mind of self-reliance and healthy, happy self-esteem. It's time to put your experience through this lens, do the work, and come out on top. It's time to reject the rejecter. Your journey of hope, healing, and happiness starts now. Starts with this podcast, with this book, with this series, with this boot camp if you join us. I know there's not a lot of stuff about how to heal attachment. I know that. So until the whole world steals my stuff, let's get together. Let's work on this. Let's do this, guys. You can do this. You can do this. You don't have to be a rejectee any longer. It's time to reject the rejecter, do the work, and come out on the other side. You can do this. More in part 2. Talk to you soon.